Welcome back to the Baseball Blue Book Podcast, where we focus on the journey, not the destination. Brought to you by the Baseball Blue Book app. Are you in the book? And now, your host, Eric Wobenaw. Welcome back to the Baseball Blue Book Podcast. Eric Wobenaw here, president of the Baseball Blue Book, and looking forward to today's podcast episode with Coach Cooper out of Penn State. Hey, Coach, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Eric. I appreciate you having me on. Excited to be here.
Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun kind of making the rounds through the state of Pennsylvania. Has a place in my heart. Both my daughters were born in Pittsburgh, Allegheny General Hospital. And so love to talk to kind of my fellow state guys and kind of learning about the program. So looking forward to this and really getting into kind of your journey of getting to a coach. I know that you've gone through a number of kind of steps to get to where you're at today. So looking forward to kind of learning more about you. And then certainly like we do it for all of our episodes, giving you an opportunity at the end to kind of share your program and give some advice to some players that may be interested in taking a look at your program. So we'll go ahead and start from the very beginning. And that, when I say very beginning, it could be whenever you think that is. Some people start really, really young and some just go right into the high school years. So why don't you go ahead and start us with kind of your first introduction or really when you knew baseball was what you wanted to do?
Well, I got to be honest with you. I'm still hoping that the Boston Red Sox are going to draft me and I can play left field for them. I mean, that was my goal growing up for sure. But I'm sure they'll get to me at some point. But
fingers crossed, right?
Yeah, exactly. But my dad was an educator, a college professor. My mom was in elementary school education. So the first thing is that I grew up in a family of educators. My sister is a teacher currently out in the state of California. I was very lucky that I was surrounded by some great coaches growing up. And specifically, my freshman year in high school, my father passed away. He had been my little league coach and kind of obviously he's the one that got me involved and that instilled that love of baseball. Yeah. But I look back and I was very fortunate that my high school coach was who he was and he cared about me as a person. And he was one of the first people outside my immediate family to come see me when my dad passed away.
Wow, that's awesome.
Really helped look out for me, as I was learning what it takes to be a man and trying to chase my dreams. And then I went to Sacramento City College and had the fortune to play for one of the game's best in Jerry Weinstein.
Okay.
Who again cared about me as a person. I was not a very good player. Most guys go to a junior college so they can play. I went there and redshirted, but because Jerry operated his program the way he did, he wouldn't cut you. You'd have to bring value to the team and you'd have to accept your role. But he continued to really instill that love of teaching and coaching. And then when it came time for me to leave Sacramento City College, I tell this to people all the time, like I was going to go, my dad grew up back east. I was going to go to either Providence College, Northeastern, or Hartford, and had some opportunities, a little bit of scholarship to potentially go to one of those. And about a week before I was going to make my decision, Coach Weinstein called me into his office and said, what would you think about going to the University of Miami? And I was like, are you talking to me? He had sent players to Miami. He had coached at Miami and he called them and basically without ever me asking or saying anything about it, called them and said, look, I got a guy that wants to be a coach someday. And this is the best environment for him. Here's what he can do for you.
Awesome.
And I always share that because I think it's really important that, especially for coaches, you got to remember why you're doing this. We all want to win. We're all very competitive. But the truth of the matter is you have an opportunity to make an impact on young people, and you're going to make an impact if you're coaching, whether it's positive or negative. And I was fortunate that in a time in my life when my dad wasn't there, that I had people like this that didn't care what my batting average was, didn't care,
Right.
how many starts I got or anything like that. I mean, if it isn't for those guys, if it isn't for Jerry Weinstein picking up the phone, I never go to the University of Miami. So that's I basically went there to be a student coach. Played a little bit my first year, but not really. That was more because they needed a body. And then I started my coaching career the very next year as a senior there, and then I've been coaching ever
That's
since.
awesome. I love hearing those stories because, you know, you pointed out that no matter if it was good or bad, the influence that these coaches have on young people. And I can remember my little league coaches. Right. It's been 40 years, and you still remember who they are and the impact that they had on you. And I think that's so important to talk. We get into kind of advice for young coaches. I think you kind of hit it right from the beginning. Is whatever you're doing is going to impact these kids either positively or negatively. And we have to be aware of why we're doing this. And I appreciate you starting off with that. So you had people in your life right away, and had some difficult times, obviously losing a parent early on, but also having the influence of these coaches. When you went to Miami and you started this kind of down the coaching path, when did you realize, and maybe take a step back, you said you weren't that good, but you really were there to you love the game, and you even mentioned wanting to play for the Red Sox, kind of a dream of yours. How did you know, and what did you go through that from a process perspective to really know that this is what you were going to do? Coaching being your destination at that point.
Yeah, I realized pretty quickly when I got to the junior college that, my playing beyond college was not going to be, in the cards. And so I also knew that I could have a significant role on any teams that I was on at Sacramento City College, and then at the time wherever I would go after that. I loved the game. I loved learning. I loved being a teammate. And at Sac City, we won a lot, and I liked being a part of a winning
Yeah.
organization. And so for me, it was more of looking at it and going, okay, well, yeah, and at this whole time, like, I never lost the desire to play. I loved it. I wish I could still play, but the truth of the matter is that for me, it was just an exciting course correction as far as, hey, I'm gonna learn, and I'm gonna be a better teacher because of it, better coach because of it. And so that's kind of how I looked at it. I almost looked, my time at Sacramento City College playing for somebody like Jerry Weinstein, and then going to Miami and being around Jim Morris and different people like that. I mean, I got a degree level education in
Oh yeah.
coaching and
Oh
teaching
yeah.
right off the bat. And so, it was just more of being realistic of where I was at and what I could do. And, I say that because I think it's important for players that are super talented too, that can continue to play. You have to be realistic of where you're at. And that goes both ways. It also goes for when, like, if you're a really good player and you're not realistic of the fact that there are thousands and thousands of really good players, not just in this country, but around the world,
Right.
that are trying to do the same thing you want to do, then you better keep working. You better, the old saying is, you're never getting, you either get better or you get worse. You never stay the
Right.
same.
Yep.
And, so you have to be realistic on, hey, yeah, that's great that I'm at this level of my game, but you know what? I have to keep at it and keep figuring out a way to get better and learn and grow. And so that's just, I think, kind of where I was at that age. It was just, all right, I'm realistic about what the future of my career
Yeah.
will be.
And certainly having some of those mentors and coaches that are around you, helping you kind of facilitate that mindset, that change, and the realization, being real, right? Being realistic of kind of what you want to do, but also knowing you wanted to stay in the game. You mentioned something about having a master's level of coaching because of the people that were around or that you surrounded yourself with. That's an interesting point that you made, right? Coaching you can't go get a degree in coaching. So it really is important as you go through the process as an early coach to pick and find those fits that make sense for you to grow in your game. Was a lot of it just kind of luck that you fell into these places that it was, or how was that process of being able to kind of find yourself around these really just, high IQ guys and kind of legends of the game?
Yeah, some of it is luck, sure. I mean, I grew up in the town that Jerry Weinstein was the head coach, and so I got a chance to be around him, and then, he opened up a door for me to go to the University of Miami. And it just so happened that Jim Morris was the head coach there. But, the truth of the matter is that it also, you have to take advantage of those opportunities.
Absolutely.
And, so yes, I was very fortunate that I was around guys like that. And then, I got a chance to go to Wake Forest, and I learned a different way from when George Greer was the head coach here and how he did things. And then I was around Rick Jones, who's in the ABCA Hall of Fame at Tulane, and Jim Schlossnagel and I were assistants together, and he's at Texas A&M, and and then I was at Oral Roberts with Rob Walton, and back at Sac City with my college teammate Andy McKay, who was the head coach. So, I've been fortunate enough to be around unbelievable baseball people. But then, I also take a lot of pride in I took advantage of the opportunities. I worked really, really hard. I think probably the biggest thing is, especially when you're young, and I'm going to be the first to say that I did this as well. When you're young, you got to really make sure that you enjoy where you're at and take advantage of that opportunity and learn from it. Like, I think too many young coaches, and again, I'll raise my hand. I was like, I want to be a head coach tomorrow. Right. Well, I wasn't ready to be a head coach at that time. And so anytime you take a job, you need to take a job with the thought that you're going to be there for the rest of your life and not try to hit the fast forward button. But, and then I've always felt like it's extremely important to meet people and do it authentically, not to meet people so you can say I'm connected to that person, but meet people so you can learn from them. I was fortunate that, guys like Dave Snow and Mike Gillespie, and George Horton and just some of the, Ron Polk, guys that would take time, Skip Burtman would take time to answer questions of this young coach, and I think that, and then not being afraid to do the most menial job that you can, because that you learn from the ground up on how to do this thing. And then more importantly, when you are a head coach, if you do get the opportunity to be a head coach, you have a real empathy for what younger coaches and different people are doing. Now, it doesn't mean that you let them do whatever, or you're like, oh, I understand. If anything, it means you can hold them a little more accountable just because you've been there and done that. So I was very fortunate, and to this day, I'm thankful. But you could, number one, you got to make your opportunity, and then number two, you got to do something with it when you get it.
You couldn't have summarized it even better, or any better. I like what you just said, right? That it may have been luck, but it's taking that opportunity that you get and you make something of it, because everybody has an opportunity there. Whatever that opportunity may be, it's what you're going to do with that and going at it as hard as you can. The other thing that you mentioned was really because finding the roles, and I always view coaching at this level really is kind of the CEO, right? You're running an organization. You've got your executive board above you that you're answering to, but you also have your staff and your vice presidents that you're really responsible for doing. How do you go into, your goal is to be a head coach. Maybe it's not. How do you know that you found the right fit? Because one of the things you see a lot, and I think it's what's happening even at the transfer portal. A lot of people make these bad decisions and then they jump in and then they move. What are some of the positives and the negatives of that, and some advice that you might share across the board, not just the portal, but also from the coaching carousel, right? People moving all the time. I'm actually updating our directory right now, and I look at all the coaching changes of just this year into next. There's a couple hundred new coaches at the levels, and that's a lot higher than most sports. Talk about that and kind of the what your advice might be.
Yeah, I think it's very similar for both a coach making a decision on jobs and things like that, and then also players. I think first and foremost as a coach, you have to really truly define why you want to coach. And again, I'm not, I don't, I'm not holier than thou. I'm not better than anybody else, but I love coaching. I love teaching. I love trying to make a positive impact because I saw what it did for me. So I personally don't never wanted to be at a place where I felt like I had to um, compromise that belief into what I wanted to
Okay.
do. And you know, and so I think first, so when you define kind of what you want to be as a coach, how you want to do things, then that gives you a good compass to follow, right?
That's
And
good.
then the other piece is when don't, and this is something I was so naive and didn't understand. Like I remember I interviewed for a head coaching job at the age of 25, and I was one of the finalists, and I didn't get it. And I remember thinking, I was so stupid back then. Like I thought, okay, well, I'll be able to X and O better than anybody, and I'll be able to do this. I hadn't done anything really to I hadn't fundraised money yet. I hadn't really. I mean, I recruited, but I hadn't really recruited, and I
Right.
hadn't. So it was like you don't want to be a head coach just to say you're a head coach. You want to be a head coach in a place where you can make an impact and that the resources are there for you to run a program and be successful. And I think too many times people just, decide, hey, I want to be a coach and I want to be a head coach as quick as I can. So then they don't fully vet the
Yeah.
opportunity, and then, you get there and it's like, well, okay, well, there's some stuff here that I didn't
Yeah.
realize. And that's not good. Right. I also think that you have to, when I say you have to really decide what kind of coach you want to be, like, again, and I've had this conversation with lots of guys, and there are people out there that are like, hey, if you're not trying to be a coach at the highest levels or at the Power Five schools or anything like that, then you know you're kind of less than everybody else. Well, I don't believe that. If you're the head high school coach at some Division 6 school and you love what you do, then you have the best job in the world.
Absolutely.
You have the best job in the country,
Absolutely.
and that's how you have to
Yeah.
look at it, right? Like it's not, oh well, I'm the head coach of Penn State, a Power 5 school, so you know Joe whoever is JV head coach, and well, I'm better than him. No, I'm
Right.
not. Like if he loves what he
Yep.
does and he's making an impact, he could very easily be better than me. So I think that's important. And then the same thing with the portal. But there's a lot of layers to that. I am a believer in giving kids opportunities, and they are
Yeah.
young. Um, but I also am an older school guy where when there's so many kids I coached or played with that when they first came in, you're like, this kid will never play here. Like he's not good enough. And then all of a sudden, halfway through his second year or the end of his second year, going into his third year, you're like, this guy's good. And why? Because he developed, and everybody develops at a different
Yep.
time. Nobody develops the same. Well, that's going to become less and less, and that hurts. Like that I don't like that. Like I think it's too easy now to pull the plug and to jump ship. But now, having said that, where where the where the NCAA has put college baseball and the 11.7 scholarships and just how it's so inequitable throughout the whole
Yep.
system, you know, it's also put coaches in a position where, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to collect players. Like there's a lot of programs out there that people talk about how great they recruit. Well, they don't. They collect players. They collect like 50 players for 20 something slots, and then they just weed them out and all pull scholarships and things like that. And so like that to me is the same thing. It's like, well, anybody can do that. I can throw 50 players up on the wall and, by the time it's time to cut it down to 35, tell you, hey, these 35 are the best guys to go forward
Right.
with.
Right.
So I don't necessarily love where we are, but is an evil thing both ways in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But for the reasons that some kids have to do it, I think it's a great thing.
we could probably do multiple episodes on just the portal and the positives and negatives, and really enjoy listening to coaches' kind of perspective on the whole thing. You talked about, understanding where you were at or what you need to do from when taking this head coach, and back to the CEO comment. I don't know if a lot of people actually understand what coaches do. I talked to a couple of kind of old school coaches. I think Nyman was one of them. But he said, if I'm able to do 15% of my day is baseball related, then I'm thrilled, because there's so many other things you mentioned about fundraising and, roster management and reporting the different things up to who you have to report to, and just all of the things that go into the head coach. It's probably not what most people think it is. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair statement. And it's, again, I go back to when I was a young assistant, right? And I would be shocked to find anybody who said, hey, I got into coaching because I wanted to be a CEO of a program. My guess is that they wanted to get into coaching because they love teaching the game. Yeah. They love being on the field with their kids, with the student athletes. So knowing that that's why you get into it, and then realizing that when you are a head coach, don't get me wrong, I love being a head coach, but the thing that I love the most is give me a fungo, give me a bucket of balls, let me teach.
Yep.
And you have to make decisions. And when it comes to that, and there's a bunch of different ways to set it up. There are very successful head coaches that don't do the CEO thing. They're like, hey, I'm coaching and I'll have a bunch of operations guys or whatever do that, or that's just not as important. Right. And then there's guys that are totally CEOs. But I think regardless of how you do it, it's got to be authentic to you. And more importantly, you have to empower those around you to be good. One of the things that Rick Jones was so good at when I was at Tulane was, he hired me and he goes, all right, you're the head coach of the hitters and you're the head coach of the infielders. We better be good.
That's good.
And
that's good.
It was great. Like, he let me coach. He let me get in there and work and look, he was very like, hey, we better be good at both. And then, but I think that if you hire somebody and then you don't let them coach, then, I don't understand that piece of it. Now, the other piece that we have to do as head coaches is coach the coaches. Right. So just like if you want your players to be really good at something, well, then you have to emphasize it. You have to make time and practice it. Well, same goes for your coaches. Like if you hire a brand new coach and they are doing something different than you want, well, then you got to do a better job communicating and educating them as to why you're doing it.
No, that's good. You talked about coaching the players and wanting to get out there in the fungo and kind of hitting the balls, and why you came out. Why did you get into the coaching? You have a quote on your bio that talks about the student athlete, and really the first word is student, and it's really where you focus. Talk about kind of the balance of teaching as the athlete and as well as teaching as the student, but also I think more importantly is teaching from an overall kind of a young man perspective, right? Because I know that as we started this conversation, the influences that you have as a coach, you really have those three pillars that from a head coach perspective, right? You've got three things that you're kind of navigating through. I certainly know from about your bio and kind of you're listening to you what your focus is, but talk about those three things and how you balance, and maybe it's not a balance, maybe it's focusing on one thing. But I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that.
So I think first and foremost, one of the biggest things that I was taught by Jerry Weinstein is that you can't coach everybody the same way. And his reasoning for that, and what I have always taken away from it, is you're going to have guys that are so driven and hard on themselves that you piling on to them being hard on them and being almost like, hey, you got to be a perfectionist, that's not going to work for that kid. And then you're going to have, other guys that maybe are too busy patting themselves on the back. I think the biggest thing you got to find is you got to develop an authentic relationship with players and try to find out what it is that scares them, that they're afraid of, that motivates them. Why do they love to play? Why are they struggling? Because, you know, when I was real young, the easiest thing as a coach, when I was real young, the easiest thing is, especially as an assistant, I'm so tired of this guy. Like, he doesn't do this. He's not doing this. Let's just get rid of him. Well, dig a little deeper. Why isn't he doing it? Now, I'm not saying you should ever keep somebody who is tearing away at the fabric of the culture of your program,
Right.
or things like
Right.
that. So I just make sure that's clear. But, one of the examples I have used in the past is, I had a kid in my head coaching career that was really difficult to coach at first, like really difficult, and very combative, very like, emotional, um, and it kind of came to a head one day. And I mean, I was really close to getting rid of him, and I probably would have gotten rid of a guy like that as a head coach in my younger years. But we sat down, and you could tell something was wrong, and kept having to chip away at it. Finally, I said, "Hey, man, just tell me. I can't help you if you don't tell me." And come to find out, he had earlier in his life, he had tried to kill himself. And, you know, the minute he said it, everything became so crystal
Yeah.
clear as to
Yep.
his entire self-worth at that point was, I got to be a good baseball player, because if I'm not,
I'm
I'm
nothing.
nothing.
Right. Right.
And so that's a very extreme
Mm-hmm.
example, but that's the kind of stuff that, you know, what are we really here trying to do as
Right.
coaches? And oh, by the way, that kid was really good. Like, and once we could help him um, get the help he needed, and be like, he took off as a baseball player, which is great. That's so
Yep.
secondary, but it's the truth is we don't know what everybody's going through, and just because you dealt with something as a player doesn't mean that kid is going to deal with it the same
Yeah.
way. And I think that's important when you look at it.
No, that's really powerful. They're kids, and you're trying to build a winning baseball program, but the realization that they all have life experiences, and understanding those. When thinking about that, do you find yourself from a recruiting perspective looking for certain types of kids, or is that just come with the territory as far as you're going to have to coach each one of these kids a little bit different because of the experiences?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you try to find the perfect kid, you'll never find it, right?
It's good.
And I think that if you, again, if you're just trying to find certain guys, then you're really not a great teacher. You're just teaching kids that you're able to connect with.
Great.
Now,
Yep.
having said that, there is value in, hey, I like how this kid goes about his stuff. There's not some. There's a lot of value in
Yep.
that. Okay, um, but I think you have to be really authentic as to who you are, and very upfront in the recruiting process with the kids you're recruiting. And I can share this from my experience. When I left Wright State and came to Penn State, all of a sudden now I've got 107,000 people at a football game on a Saturday. I've got this world class education, and organizations and coaches that would never call me back at Wright State or call me back. Well, I got caught up in some of that with, like, okay, well, this kid's really a highly rated guy. Well, that's great, but is he the right fit for our
Right.
program?
Right.
Is because toughness and culture win anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're Penn State, Wright State, a junior college, a high school. Toughness and culture win everywhere. So being naive or losing sight of, it's about the right kind of people and not just talent, is really, really important. Again, when I was younger, I'd have been like, okay, well, that kid right now, yeah, he's super talented, but he's not a guy that really buys into the team. I was the one that was like, well, I'll be able to change all those things. And you can't.
Right.
Like, you can't.
Right.
But so, and the other thing I would tell people is that I don't care how long you do this thing, you're always going to make mistakes in
Yeah.
recruiting. And that's just, it's an inaccurate deal. But you're going to do it on both sides. And what I mean by that is you're going to recruit somebody that you think is going to be knockout, drop dead star player from day one, and it never pans out for whatever reason. And then you're going to take a guy as a walk on that's like, oh, okay, well, maybe. And then all of a sudden he's a dude. And so you got to remember that stuff happens, and you just got to coach the kids that you have, and you got to find a way to reach them to get the most out of them.
That's really good. I really appreciate the insight of kind of what you go through. Being a kind of a Power Five conference, and have come from different areas that certainly were not. What is, I think from the surface, I think some young coaches and maybe even players would think that your job as recruiting is got to be easier as you move up. Now the demands and the expectations probably go up, but the recruiting, and I'm just, on the surface, seem like it would be. Talk about that and tell me why that is probably an inaccurate statement.
Yeah, it's inaccurate from the standpoint of you're still trying to find the right fit for your
That's
program.
Good, yeah.
And you're trying to find the right type of kids that want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Like, one of the things I talk about with Penn State that is a positive is, again, unbelievable campus life, go to the best football games in the world on Saturday, get a world-class education. We play in we're a Power 5 school, one of the best conferences in the country. Like, that's all awesome. But if you don't get the right fit, those are the exact reasons why kids kind of shut it down while they're here. Yeah. Well, what's the big deal? If I'm struggling, I'm still going to the best football games in the world. I'm still getting a world-class education. I'm still a Big Ten student athlete. So again, it goes down to finding the right fit. When I was at Wright State, we just really kind of made our mark, and we got guys that had a chip on their shoulder. We couldn't get the 4-tool guy or the 5-tool guy. We got the 1.5 tool guy that was mad because the MAC or the Big Ten schools wouldn't recruit them, right? And so and they had a chip on their shoulders, and then we just really fed into that mentality, and then the players just took hold of it and took off with it. And so I don't really find it all that different. What I will say is that in this new arena of the NILs and the portal and everything, this past summer I spent more time watching college kids in summer leagues that were in the portal than I did high school kids.
Wow.
And it's because we had to. And when, you're trying to, help kids see what they can get from an NIL deal at your school, again, I know it's the new normal. And if you want to survive in it, you got to adapt, but it's just not why I got into it.
Yep.
But does that make it wrong? No, it's just a big challenge, and that's where I would say to a certain extent, some of the, I worked a couple camps in the summer with some really great Division III coaches and high academic coaches. And I tell them, I say, you guys, I love my job. I wouldn't give my job up for anything, but some of those guys have the best jobs in the world right now because they don't have to deal with a lot of that, and they can, but there's no perfect job. There isn't. And if it was perfect, it wouldn't be open for someone to take it. So the challenges I have, the Division III coach has challenges at a different level, and so for them too, when they're like, oh my gosh, he's at Penn State, so he's got this, and this. Yeah. But there's just a different set of issues and things that you got to deal with. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just different.
Yeah. And then and then it continues to kind of morph into different things. I love your point of it's not something that I asked for, but we have to deal with it. Right. And it's part of the job. And I think that's a great attitude for everybody. Right. It's this is what we're doing. There's no perfection. It's our journey, right? That's what this whole episode's about, is the journey and the ups and the downs. We didn't really get into a lot of the other things, but I'll tell you what, this has been really informative. I've learned a lot, and it's been a lot of fun. Before we wrap up, Coach, I always like to get coaches kind of their idea of and really their providing some. God, I just went blank. I can't even think of the word. I've done this so much. It's let me write down the time here. It's been 34 minutes, so I can edit it out.
I have that effect on people. So kind of put them.
I literally cannot think of the word. It's not recommendation. It's advice. I couldn't think of the word. This is crazy. This is total brain freeze on that one. Your recommendations and advice for kids, and more importantly, if somebody wants to play at Penn State, I certainly grew up in Pittsburgh. There's a lot of guys at the high school levels that Penn State is their dream school. Obviously, you got to be really good. Power 5 conference, top of top of the schools that they can choose from. But what are you looking for, and what can these kids do that may be something that is a bit unique? Maybe it's a little bit different than what other programs. But what are the things that you're really looking for from a player?
Well, I think first and foremost, I always recommend, whether it's Penn State or somewhere else, like getting to those camps, I think are huge. Like, so
okay.
We've done a lot of recruiting out of our prospect camps.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to get people to spend money. It's just that you're actually the audience that you want to see you is there. So going to a prospect camp or two at the schools that you're really interested in, I think is very beneficial. There's such a economic, business on travel baseball. I just think the biggest thing that I would caution players and parents, and there are really good travel organizations and really good travel coaches, yep. But I think the thing you got to really caution yourself on is the amount of events you play in doesn't mean that you're going to get recruited more. Doesn't mean that it's number one, are you good enough? So all the money you're spending to go around and play, if you're not truly where you need to be physically, mm-hmm. you're not getting exposure, you're getting exposed. So use the money to invest in training, like get stronger, get faster, get arm strength, get whatever, because you're going to get written off before you ever start if you're not there physically. The second thing I would say is that, again, remember the game, as Tim Corbin says, the game's going to reward you on its time. Yep. So as just because your buddy that's on your travel team at the age of 15 commits somewhere doesn't mean that you're never going to have that opportunity.
Right.
Okay. Grow into the type of player you are for another 4 years. And so it's just always working to try to get better. And I kind of like what I said earlier about a coach. I think the same thing goes as a player. And social media doesn't do a great job of helping this, but just enjoy where you're at that moment and that process. And then I think I really believe is big is, all of us coaches want winning players. The environment that's set up now for high school isn't conducive to that. And here's what I mean. And again, not trying to say that our era is better, but when we were in high school, you had to make the team. Yep. And if you didn't play, and you tried to win a state championship with your boys, and you practiced every day and to be a team, and you learned how to, guys had to learn how to cinch and have a role. And then in the summer you tried out for Legion. And if you didn't make Legion team, you got a job.
Yep.
Like, it wasn't like, hey, and so now this whole select baseball thing, well, it's not really, if you don't like it at one place because you're not getting the role you want, unfortunately, a lot of people are just pulling out and going to another one. And sometimes that's exactly what needs to be done. So let me make sure I say that. But here's where I'm going with this is that most of them, because they bring kids in multiple times a week, they don't practice hard at all. They bring in guest players. They bring in pitchers that'll throw, a pitcher will throw 1 or 2 innings, and then he is done for the weekend. He goes home. So they're not learning to be teammates. They're each other accountable. There's a new World Series every weekend and tournament where you're guaranteed 5 games. and the players and parents are judging it by how many coaches were there instead of,
Yep.
hey, you know what? We didn't play very good baseball this weekend. Like, we weren't a very good team. We did, so the biggest thing I have found over the last 10 to 12 years is you're getting guys when they get here that really don't know how to win. It doesn't mean that they don't want to, but they haven't been taught.
Yep.
And, so I think that's the biggest thing is if you really want to stick out, watch the game of baseball and learn what winning baseball is. Like, there's so much baseball being played by kids, more so than any time of our lives. More baseball on TV than ever before in the game. Watch the game, learn stuff, and you'll stick out. You'll stick out like a sore thumb.
That's awesome. That's great. That is really good advice. As I was sitting there thinking, you're absolutely right. The travel team, it's almost like a showcase. And if you're not ready to showcase your talent, you're being exposed rather than looking for exposure. So, spend your money wisely. Training and getting yourself stronger, faster, or better is probably something that you might need to look at. But you've prefaced a lot of things of, hey, this is, this is part of it, but there's also good in it as well. And so I appreciate both your takes and how you kind of navigated through that. Coach, it's been an honor. This has been so much fun. We're at the kind of at the end, but I appreciate you jumping on with me, giving us some great advice, and looking forward to watching your team. I hope the Hawkeyes beat you this year. I mean, you guys beat them at the end of the last year, and so I wasn't real thrilled about that. But what are your thoughts on this coming season? What's the recruiting? How's it going? And what do you what's it look like next year?
Well, if they can overcome the coaching, we're going to be pretty good. Guys, I think we got a chance to do some cool things. We just got to stay healthy. We got to get a little bit better, and we got to have everybody buy in. We had a good group that bought in, especially from the second half of the year on last year. And if we can,
that's great.
Do that again and build on it, we'll be in a good place.
Awesome, Coach. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. You have a great day.